How a Supreme Court case redefined whiteness. Is a high-caste Hindu born in Punjab, India, who is of complete Indian descent, considered a white individual? This inquiry was submitted to the United States Supreme Court in 1923. Bhagat Singh Thind, a U.S. Army veteran and educated English-speaking Indian immigrant, had previously attempted to naturalize as a U.S. citizen by asserting his whiteness on two separate occasions. Congress restricted naturalization to free white individuals and those of African descent and nativity at that time. What does this court case, which is both consequential and little known, reveal about the broader narrative of white supremacy and citizenship in the United States? Bhagat Singh Thind, a 20-year-old, arrived in Seattle, Washington, aboard the SS Minnesota on July 4, 1913. Between 1900 and 1920, the United States received more than 14.5 million immigrants. During this period of widespread immigration, Thind was one of 8,000 South Asians who emigrated to the United States. The United States had a population of over 92 million individuals at the time of Thind's arrival. Therefore, the South Asian population was a mere fraction of the total. The Punjab region, which was under British authority at the time, was the primary source of the few Indians who arrived. The majority originated from rural farming villages and small communities in India. And in the United States, they were compelled to perform physically demanding tasks for inadequate compensation. South Asians arrived during a period of widespread anti-Asian hysteria, and Indians were rapidly transformed into the subsequent iteration of a perceived Asiatic invasion. Indians were even referred to as the least desirable race of immigrants admitted thus far by the U.S. Immigration Commission in 1911. In 1917, all Indian and most Asian immigration was prohibited as a result of the establishment of a barred Asiatic zone. 6 years later, the demographic of Asian immigrants is exceedingly diverse. They originate from a multitude of countries in Asia. They possess distinct histories, cultures, religions, and ethnicities. Nevertheless, they were frequently grouped as Orientals or as Asiatic invasion upon their arrival in the United States. And what this does in the American psyche is to establish South Asians within the pre-existing framework of Asian immigrants as economic competition, unassimilable aliens, and a threatening horde. Citizenship was and continues to be a prerequisite for economic and social advancement. Several states prohibited Asian immigrants from obtaining citizenship, which prevented them from voting, practicing law, or working as government employees. They were prohibited from possessing land and were unable to safeguard themselves from deportation. The sole method by which immigrant men such as Thind could become U.S. citizens was to naturalize, which is the voluntary process of becoming a U.S. citizen as opposed to being born here. The Federal Naturalization Act of 1790 was the first federal law on naturalization, which restricted citizenship to free white individuals. After the Civil War, the Naturalization Act was amended to include aliens of African nativity and persons of African descent, thereby granting citizenship to millions of black individuals who were previously enslaved and existed without citizenship rights. Even though citizenship did not grant equal privileges, at that time, there was no comprehensive legal definition of whiteness. However, there was a legal precedent. The courts rarely contested the whiteness of the majority of European immigrants who arrived during the 19th and early 20th centuries, and they were able to naturalize. Even though we are aware that they experienced periods of severe discrimination, in the interim, the process of naturalizing immigrants from various Asian countries was exceedingly challenging. This encompassed Syrians, Afghans, and Armenians, in addition to Indian immigrants, who nevertheless submitted applications for and occasionally obtained citizenship. In what manner? However, there was no consensus among the evaluators regarding the criteria for determining whether an individual was white or sufficiently white. However, appearances were significant. In 1917, the same year that Indians were prohibited from immigrating, Thind submitted his declaration of intention to naturalize to a county registrar in Oregon State. He identified himself as white. Thind aspired to become a member of the exceedingly small group of Indian immigrants who had effectively naturalized in lower courts, primarily those who were affluent. Thind enlisted in the U.S. Army while he awaited approval of his application. The military actively recruited immigrants and non-citizens to serve, despite the prevalence of xenophobia. Thind obtained his initial certificate of U.S. citizenship while stationed at Camp Lewis in Washington state. However, his citizenship was revoked by the federal government 4 days later. Thind submitted an additional citizenship application in 1919. However, a federal agent from the Bureau of Naturalization attempted to persuade the court that Thind was ineligible for naturalization. Nevertheless, the district judge recognized Thind's military service and his sincere respect for the Constitution, laws, customs, and privileges of this nation. Additionally, he referenced a series of cases that established the fact that Indians were white. Thind was conferred citizenship for the second time on November 18, 1920. However, this decision would be invalidated. Thind's applications had been monitored by the Department of Justice since their inception. The government intended to use Thind as a test case to definitively establish that Indians were not white. The Department of Justice appealed the judgment, and the case ultimately reached the U.S. Supreme Court. In the United States versus Bhagat Singh Thind case, the Supreme Court commenced hearing arguments on January 11, 1923. This would be Thind's final opportunity to establish his whiteness and become a citizen. The case was explicitly characterized by the Supreme Court as a test of the Naturalization Act and its intended definition of whiteness. To establish Thind's whiteness, his attorneys expanded upon prior naturalization cases, assembling arguments that had persuaded lower courts that Indians were white individuals. Initially, they contended that Thind was racially pure as a high-caste Indian, as high-caste families did not intermarry with other communities. Additionally, his attorneys contended that, as a result of this purported racial purity, Thind shared a common Aryan ancestry with European citizens. Thind was Caucasian, and as a result, white as an Aryan. The Nazis would later employ the now debunked notion of common ancestry as a result of a purported Aryan invasion. However, that is a separate video. Thind's arguments were unanimously rejected by the Supreme Court. Ironically, they rejected the scientific racism employed by Thind's attorneys, albeit for equally racist purposes. Justice Sutherland observed in the final ruling that even though a blonde Scandinavian and brown Hindu may have once shared a common ancestor, the average man would observe unmistakable and profound differences between them today. The 9 white males simply did not perceive Thind as sufficiently white. As per the court, all Indians were unquestionably of Asiatic stock, and as a result were ineligible for U.S. citizenship. Period. The trial's aftermath was both rapid and catastrophic. Indians were the initial group of the United States to have their citizenship revoked. Over 70 naturalized Indians were deprived of their citizenship between 1923 and 1926. They, along with their spouses and children, were placed in a state of social, economic, and legal uncertainty. This encompassed the Bagai family. Vaishno Das Bagai and his family relocated from Peshawar, which is now a part of Pakistan. Bagai relocated to San Francisco in 1915 with his wife Kala and 3 sons, Brij, Madan, and Ram. Upon arriving in America, Bagai embraced his new existence. He adopted Western mannerisms, spoke fluent English, and donned Western suits. He even established an establishment, Bagai's Bazaar. However, the Thind ruling disrupted the Bagai family's existence, as they all forfeited their citizenship and subsequent livelihoods. Vaishno attempted to visit his relatives in India in 1928. However, he was denied a U.S. passport. This was the deciding factor for Vaishno, who ultimately committed suicide in a combination of mourning and protest. Vaishno submitted a letter to the San Francisco Examiner, which published heart-wrenching excerpts. Is life worth residing in a gilded cage? The bridges were burned behind, and obstacles were erected in this manner and blockades in that manner. The U.S. government was encouraged by the Thind ruling to revoke citizenship from other immigrants, such as Mexicans and Afghans. It also established the foundation for the most comprehensive and restrictive Immigration Act to date, which was passed by Congress with resounding support in 1924. Thind was granted U.S. citizenship in 1935 as a result of a law that allowed all veterans, irrespective of their ethnicity, to naturalize. He lectured on metaphysics and obtained his Ph.D. in theology and English literature from UC Berkeley. Thind went away in 1967. Immigration and naturalization policies underwent gradual modifications during Thind's final 2 decades. The immigration of Indians was once again permitted by a sequence of federal laws that commenced in 1946. Although these laws continued to retain quotas that prioritized specific countries over others. However, the decades that followed witnessed substantial migration from India and other Asian countries. In the 2020 United States Census, more than 5.5 million individuals identified themselves as Indian or Pakistani. In the same year, the city of Berkeley, California, named the street in honor of Kala Bhagat, Vaishno's widow. Nearly a century after her family had been displaced, Kala endured a future that was exceedingly uncertain in the aftermath of Vaishno's demise. In 1946, she became a U.S. citizen, remarried, and funded the college education of her 3 sons. She committed herself to the establishment of a community for other South Asian immigrants, organizing events for women who immigrated as restrictions were relaxed after 1965. Kala was affectionately referred to as Mother India by the time of her death in 1983. Our immigration discussions are still propelled by the issue of race. Immigration continues to be a prominent campaign issue. Additionally, the rhetoric regarding immigrants in our elections remains explicitly bigoted. According to Amanda Frost, a legal scholar, millions of individuals have had their citizenship revoked in the past 2 centuries. Denaturalization persists to this day, whether it is due to minor errors in applications or the actual wrongful deportation of American citizens, particularly those residing near the Mexican frontier. We are perpetually inquisitive about the essence of American identity as the daughter of South Asian immigrants. To this day, all immigrants must navigate the perpetual tightrope of balancing the desire to belong without sacrificing their cultural identity. Bhagat Singh Thind's case and Vaishno Das Bhagat serve as reminders of the challenges faced by all immigrants, not just those from South Asia, who demonstrate fortitude and resilience in the presence of immense uncertainty. Claim a portion of the American dream. For additional information regarding this narrative, consult the hyperlinks provided in the accompanying description. Additionally, ensure that you are subscribed to PBS Origins to ensure that you do not miss a single episode of In the Margins.